is back.
Mic check. Oh man, we're finally back. I love the intros because it just gives me another reason to get back on the show and say welcome to Kickin the Real podcast. I'm your host Andy Diosa. If you're a first time listener, thank you for being here. If you're a multiple time listener, thank you for being here. I'm excited. It's a special occasion and a very special guest as always because on this show we only have special guests. And like I told you guys way back in the intro, I'm going to bring all different types of people on the show that I'm friends with, that I admire, that I work with, and all of the above. So today we have none other than my guy Justin Ruderman on the show, freelance journalist doing work for MLS Soccer, doing work for Leagues Cup, which just wrapped up, which is the reason why he's on the show. We're going to talk about Leagues Cup and give it a nice little recap to tie a bow on it and then get the stretch run going. And then as you see, if you're watching on YouTube, Upper 90, his own YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please go do so. Justin, my brother, thank you for coming through the kick with me. How you feeling?
Thank you, Andy, man. It's about time. I've been waiting for the invite. It's been great listening to the podcast. I love what you've done with it, and obviously always love what the work that you put out. So great to hop on here and talk some Leagues Cup. It was, I thought, a pretty good tournament. Obviously, no Messi, but without that, I thought it lived up to pretty much what we could ask. And yeah, jumping back into this MLS season with playoffs right around the corner.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. If you're not familiar with Justin, he's been doing a lot of great work and just covering a bunch of different things on the MLS side, and it was all over Leagues Cup, writing for the official Leagues Cup website. So it's a great guest to have on to, like I said, put a bow on this tournament. Obviously, the invite was going to happen. We just had to wait for the perfect time, and there was no better time than this to wrap it up for Leagues Cup. So, like I start all the shows, I do want to start with the origin story because it gives a little bit of a background onto the guest and lets the people know. So, what is the origin story for you in terms of sports writing and getting started in that career? Because I know you're obviously a big soccer fan. He's a big Man City fan, which we will touch on at the end as well. I forgot to mention that at the top of the show, but we'll get to that towards the end. But yeah, what was the origin story for you with sports writing?
Yeah, when it came to soccer, I mean, I've played soccer my whole life, so that was since, I mean, I can remember I've kicked a ball around. But I was never good enough to make it at the college level, and then I tore up my knee when I first started college freshman year. So I had to figure out another way to kind of be involved with the sport, and that was through writing. So kind of the end of my time at UCLA, I started writing and covering LAFC. Started with Area Sports Network, did some beat writing for the Striker as well. And yeah, that's just how it got started with LAFC a few years ago. I think you were probably there. My first game in that BMO press box, Bank of California back then, excuse me. And yeah, from then on, just kept writing, kept growing within MLS, and yeah, just trying to grow this league, man. I feel like there's so many people, and I started out myself with going over to England and kind of doing some coverage with international leagues and the Premier League, and there's so much focus on that. But I realized at one point that I wanted to grow it in this country because there are not enough football fans in this country, which is a crazy thing to say. And yeah, the more that we can do, whether on the English or the Spanish side, it's great to grow this game in this country. So that's all it is to me.
I love it, man. I love it. Yeah, it's definitely twofold. I always enjoy talking to people that are in the field doing the same. And Justin and I have had multiple conversations, obviously off camera and just throughout the years of seeing his progression. Like I said, the growth in covering the league, not only just here, but now, all over MLS. But this is true. Like growing the league itself, it's important because there's so much interest on these bigger leagues and these other, these stars, these global stars. And it's like, A, now we have the global stars in our backyards, but B, it's like there's a whole league and all this infrastructure and all these great things happening in MLS that people tend to, I guess, push to the side because that's just what the tradition has been. But you can't deny that it's growing. You can't deny that there's quality games and quality teams and coaches and all of the above. So it's been fun to like I said, see your growth, and always tapped in, always rooting for you, which everybody should be, because I always say this: there's a lot of room in this field for everybody to win, and people like to try to make things competitive and whatnot, but it's never that. But Leagues Cup, man, Leagues Cup is one of those things where, to that same conversation, a lot of people will say, oh, like this tournament, this and that. And listen, man, one thing that's very American is like tournaments and playoffs, and we love that here. We love the drama because something always happens. And Leagues Cup was definitely not an outlier with that. Like you mentioned, no Messi in this tournament, which last year when he got to MLS, that was his stage to show himself. And Miami did that really well as they won the first Leagues Cup in that iteration. But this one was different. There was there was a little bit of how will the Mexican teams do after last year's tournament, and they didn't really do well, and obviously they're at a disadvantage. But then I think when things started panning out, you started seeing the best of the best in MLS kind of show themselves, and there are also some surprises as well. So we'll go through all that. We're going to start with the final, LAFC Columbus or Columbus LAFC, because it was a MLS Cup rematch. It was a game that everybody was anticipating once everything panned out. And the result just happened to be kind of similar to MLS Cup, where Columbus just proved that they're on a different tier right now. It's them and everybody else in MLS, and I do include Miami in that conversation as well. But it was a very interesting game because sometimes we always like to say it's a tale of two halves, and that game truly was a tale of two halves, and we'll get into the background on that too. But what are your thoughts coming off watching Columbus win Leagues Cup 8.5 months after they beat the same team in the same building for MLS Cup in December?
Yeah, I think we have to start having the debate of whether this is the greatest MLS team of all time. I mean, the way that they've performed, it's not just about the two trophies that they've won over those past 9 months. They also went to a CONCACAF Champions Cup final and did it in incredible fashion, by the way. It's the way that they're doing this, right? They are dominating LAFC, who is a team that dominates the rest of the league, and then they make them look like they're just another team, you know? And it's really incredible the way that Nancy has built this team. And, Tata Martino, the Miami head coach, said something the other day about how Nancy is doing this with, not star players and this and that. And I think there's, a point to be said about, well, Cucho and Diego Rossi, these are some stars. But Tata has a point in that a lot of these players came from MLS Next Pro, came from college, came from all these different parts, just picking them off of different MLS teams where they're not getting kind of the credit that they deserve or the playing time that they deserve. And Wilfred Nancy spots them and he says, I can find talent here. I can produce a winning team here. And it's just incredible what he has done, to the point that I don't think he's going to be in MLS much longer, especially if he goes on to win this MLS Cup. Because if I'm a team in Europe and in the biggest leagues, I'm looking at Wilfred Nancy and seeing he just turned the culture of two clubs around and turned them into winning clubs in MLS. I'm sure that he can create a similar culture elsewhere as well. So, yeah, just incredible what they've done in many different aspects. And it's just an incredible thing to watch. You got to applaud them.
Columbus's run has been, like you mentioned, it's just been incredible. And even that with the front office change and selling Lucas Elarayan, a player that was really pulling the strings for them. And then they bring in Cucho, they bring in Diego Rossi. And it's always funny to me to see like players like Diego Rossi and Christian Ramirez, who were at once at LAFC, and now it's kind of like, I don't want to say their second chance, but it's just like another chance for them to prove themselves, and they're doing it at the highest level with that team. But the important part, which you mentioned, is the part that I think that people like us get really excited about, is what they term the sickles. Is like seeing the progression in the organization, where like you see players from Next Pro come up through the pathway, come up through the ranks, and have such a monumental impact on what the crew are doing. Like, we'll get into how Cucho was just brilliant and maybe one of the best players in MLS, but you can't overlook like how good Mo Farsi was, how good Morera was. You can't overlook like Schulte's impact in that team coming into, obviously he didn't play the final, but just coming into this tournament and into this position that they're in. Like, they're getting to all of these stages because they have such an input from the beginning, the younger players and the newer players to the more veteran players. And that obviously has to do with coaching. And I think when Wilfred Nancy was brought in to be the head coach of Columbus, the one thing that everybody said was like, he is really good at developing players. And I think that more so than tactics, like he mentions, more so than what happens in the games, it's all about the mentality. And it's incredible how he has them locked in. And it's almost a shame that the CONCACAF Champions League final went the way it did, or Champions Cup final, whether or not it was the stomach issues or whatever the hell was going on there in Mexico, because it's almost like this team, you would expect them to put up so much of a better fight and actually look a little bit more competent than they were. But when it comes to Leagues Cup, what LAFC is to Seattle, Columbus is to LAFC. Like, it's just a headache. They're in their way. They can't figure it out. And as brilliant of a mind as Steve Cherundolo is in coaching and things like that, Nancy has his number, Columbus has their number, and I just think that you have to applaud the fact that Columbus is doing this continuously. We talked about LAFC last year where they had all the chances to win these trophies and ended up going home empty-handed. Columbus is doing it this year, and they're on the opposite end. In a month, they'll be playing Campeones Cup against Club America. If they win that, that's another one to the list, and they're still very much in the running to run it back MLS Cup this year. They look, like I said, the best team in the league, and we haven't seen the MLS repeat champion since the Galaxy did it in 2011, 2012. So Columbus is just on a great level. But you got to talk to me about my boy Cucho Hernandez, obviously a Colombian superstar who has played in the Premier League, and he has come to Columbus and shown just an incredible level. And yesterday, Nancy said it, the will that he had to basically score that first goal over Ilie, and the will that he had pushed that team to win that game. 2 goals and an assist. Just an incredible performance by him. But it's at this point nothing that's surprising to me, at least.
Yeah, but it's exactly what you said. It's just the will that he has to go and win these games. I mean, when he first came to MLS, and I've said this many times, I'm sure I've told you this before, I was shocked. I was blown away that Columbus made the signing of Cucho Hernandez because I expected him to be signing for a Premier League club and playing week in and week out in the best league in the world, because that's how good I believe Cucho Hernandez is, and he shows it week in and week out here in Major League Soccer. But Wilfred Nancy gave the perfect quote after, and he said something to the effect of, the first goal was incredible to me because it shows you, yes, Cucho can finish, he can head it, he can place his finish, he can put the power on it, all the technical things, but it's the rage that he comes with to go and score. And Nancy said, my mother-in-law loves him for that. That's what it is just the rage to go and score. And that's all it was, because I think when you watch that first half, right, Steve Cherundolo said himself, he was very expected to see the way the first half went. That's what they wanted. That was the tactical game plan, is to sit deep and defend for 45 minutes. And they could only do it for 44 minutes because Cucho Hernandez wanted to go and score that goal so badly. And it's really interesting to me because when you look at the way that LAFC has set up, we've seen them move to this 3-back, 5-back formation, right? In a way that they can mirror the Columbus Crew. It's basically a formation that is set up to beat the Crew, and they still couldn't beat the Crew with that formation because Cucho and the Crew are that good. It really is incredible what they've done, and as you say, Nancy just has Cherundolo's number, even if he sets up tactically to mirror him and press him man for man and make it into a game of just, who's the better players on the pitch. Well, Cucho will answer that question for you.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the one thing I love about watching him is that he's just never in the same spot. Like, you'll see him just float around the field all game, and you're like, he's on the right side, he's in the middle, he's on the left end. It's an incredible attribute that he has, that he's that type of player, that he is always a relevant person on the field when he's on the field. Like, it's never like, oh, he has like an off day and he didn't have an effect. You're gonna see him do something, whether it's a pass, whether it's a shot, whether, like, he's always relevant on the field. And I think that puts him on a tier, like you said, that he just has that experience and has that level that he can play in these big leagues. And obviously he's done it. And I hope for his sake that, and Columbus is like, good business would be, getting him back to the big league when the time is right, and getting, a lot more money than they paid for him, which they paid a lot for him. But obviously now he's on a different level. And like you mentioned, you have eyes on maybe Wilfred Nancy. Obviously, there's going to be eyes on Cucho Hernandez. And if anybody in the Colombian Federation is listening to this, come closer, put the volume up, make the damn call. Cucho Hernandez should be playing for Néstor Lorenzo. Please, I beg you. I mean, it's just incredible that he hasn't even really been part of that rotation with the 2026 World Cup in the United States. I mean, this is a layup, man. He needs to start being part of that rotation. Maybe not as soon as September, because Columbus might be a little I guess, hesitant to give him up, but they probably won't, because they're in a good spot too. He just needs to be part of that group and start integrating himself, because I think that he can definitely offer Colombia something. And it's a talented, obviously, Colombia has a really talented team, but Cucho Hernandez certainly has a place on that attack for Néstor Lorenzo. So please make the call. This is me begging. I've been doing it for like a year now, maybe a year and a half, and it's just getting stronger and stronger as the time goes on. But one thing I do love about Wilfred Nancy too is the fact that he's like, I'm going to start Hagen in goal. And this is something that, like, confident managers do, right? But it's like, confident managers do that, and then it works out is another thing, because he has Patrick Schulte. Obviously, Schulte was with the Olympic team. So it was a little bit of back and forth. But Nazi said, I made my mind up. Like Hagen was starting this game and he did well. I mean, there were maybe like one or two moments that were really tricky in that second half where there was a little bit of miscommunication. But besides that, he held his own. And I just think that once again, being a manager of that caliber and showing that confidence to your players is why Columbus is where it is. Like I think Mo Farsi had an incredible game. I think Arsenal was great. There's just players around that team and then you see Russell Rowe come in at the end and get that goal, and he was obviously a factor in that second one as well. So it's just like everything they do seems to be working out for them, and it's like how do you stop that? Because you mentioned LAFC, Steve Cherundolo basically switched their formation after they lost to Columbus 5-1 earlier this year, and it was like not even that's going to work, man. So it's just like it's a freight train right now, and it looks like they are pretty. I mean, unless Miami is a different conversation, but like if somebody gets in their way, I don't know, but they look like they're able to run it back, and it might not even be a challenge. Like I don't know, man. This seems just tears above everybody else in MLS right now.
Yeah, and I mean, you think about it, they lose one of their best players in Aiden Morris, and it just doesn't seem to phase them. Like they just keep rolling on. Like it didn't, nothing changed. They start, a different goalkeeper, as you say. Obviously, he's Guatemala's number one, so he's, he knows what he's doing in between the sticks. But it's a big moment that Wilfred Nancy makes that call, and yeah, as you say, for me, it just makes me admire Wilfred Nancy more and the calls that he makes because it's about the team to him. It's not even about winning that game. It's about what is the best thing for my team right now, and that is starting Hagen. And so, yeah, it really is incredible. It's all to him about sticking to his principles. He said something similar in the press conference as well, where he talked about he made a change kind of after the Cucho goal to become more defensive, and he got punished, right? LAFC leveled the game, and he said, immediately I switched back because I was mad at myself that I let LAFC equalize the game because I felt like I wasn't true to myself. That I don't go into a defensive shell. That's not how I play. So he was upset with himself, and it's the same thing. If he doesn't make the decision that he feels is right, he doesn't care about winning the game. If he's doing it, somebody else's way, he wants to do it his way, and well, his way wins as well. So you can't knock him for it.
It's incredible, man. We can't give him enough praise. Salute to the Columbus crew who just keep adding to the list of accolades, whether it's MLS Next Pro, now the crew, another title. Like I mentioned, they're going to be playing for Campeones Cup against Club America. Shout out to Darlington Nagbe, the MLS legend, for another trophy in his trophy case. And we'll pivot right there on that point, like you mentioned, right? It's there was a beautiful point in that game if you were watching on Apple TV where they showed the first hydration break and they showed Nancy with his clipboard and they showed Steve Cherundolo right after writing his notes. And this is what you expected from this matchup. Like it was very much so tactic versus tactic, head coach versus head coach, and obviously an abundance of talent on the field. But for Cherundolo, it was a little weird for me that was the game plan in the first 45 because they looked absolutely shell-shocked. And it was almost like they gave them a little bit too much respect, which they should, because this is, like we mentioned, a freight train, but you almost like they defended a little too low in that block. And I think Taylor Tolman had a great call yesterday overall on the broadcast, but he was calling everything out like as it happened. And that first half, they were just chasing ghosts. And you know how that building is. You just experienced it. The reason why you're in that building is because they beat you in the MLS Cup. So like these things all have an effect of like how this game was going to go. And it's almost like, was that really the game plan? Like, let's sit and just hold on for 45 minutes and then wait for them to get tired. Like, sure, like you mentioned, maybe like a minute or two more defensively, and we could be having a different conversation, which is what Steve said in the press conference. But it's starting to remind me a little bit of Bob Bradley when it was like, this is our plan. And like, nah, man, I don't know if that's going to fly too much any longer. So what are your thoughts on just that and how that panned out for Steve Cherundolo in this game?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it's kind of half and half. I think definitely, obviously, Steve wanted to play defensively and sit back in that 45 minutes and catch them in the second half. That's true. But also, it's true that that first half didn't go exactly as he wanted. They couldn't really play out of that shape. They couldn't use Giroud for any hold-up play. They couldn't find him. The wingers were getting pinned back, so there was no way for them to break on the counter attack. Yes, he wanted to play defensively, but not that defensively, right? He wanted to have some kind of chances on the counterattack, and there were none. And so that kind of was the issue for me. And, Steve has talked about this himself many times, right? You can sit back for 10, 15, 20 minutes. But if you try and sit back for 30, 45 minutes, that's when it becomes impossible because the dam will eventually break. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and like for that to work, you need somebody like Edward Atuesta to have like a really big impact. And he just didn't have a good game, got frustrated early, and on that opening goal, it was like lazy closeout. Columbus is basically in your 18, and now it's just like pick your poison, 1-2 pass. Cucho jumps right over Ilie Sanchez, and then that whole game plan goes to shreds. And I will give him credit for the second half because it looked like a completely different team who knew what they wanted to do. But this is the interesting part to me when it comes to Columbus and LAFC. Like LAFC, we're used to seeing them score goals. They're not a team that wins 1-0. They're a team that wins 3-0, 4-0 as they beat the Rapids in semifinals. And we saw them do that consistently through Leagues Cup. We saw how Bawanga was just a menace anytime he touched the ball. And Columbus just stabilizes all of that. And once again, back to the credit of them, like Marrero was great and he's been great on Bawanga. He showed that in MLS Cup final as well. But it's just to me something of like it takes them out of their element. And the goal, like they got the equalizer. It was a Giroud header. It was a very nice header, top class header from a top class player. But it's one of those things that like they just take them out of the element. And granted, LAFC probably should have gotten a go ahead goal because they were pressuring basically all that second half. But then what happens? You go back to the same story Steve Cherundolo has been saying. It's like certain moments in games, like you're in stoppage time. You're probably, of course, thinking about PKs, which I'm sure Wilfred Nancy at some capacity was too when he made the subs late, when he brought Dewan Jones in. But the team on the field for Columbus wasn't thinking that. The team on the field for LAFC might have been, because you see Timothy Tillman in that Cucho goal is still talking to the ref as the ball's being thrown in. It's like, and I think you saw even the play prior to, which once again, going back to Taylor Twellman's call, like he mentioned the free kick basically shooting the way Cucho did. And you saw how mad Hugo Lloris was when Eddie Segura had that foul. And it was like, do not give up that foul in that position. Like just these little things. And obviously that comes with experience, but we're not talking about an inexperienced team anymore, LAFC. We're talking about a team that has experience. We're talking about a team that's been to finals, that's played in these big moments. So what is it? What's missing for them in these finals? Like, what is that, 4 straight now with a chance of winning a trophy, and they're leaving empty-handed? And you could talk about the lessons and the mishaps, but at some point things have to start being asked, or things have to start clicking, because this is not a young team anymore. This is a team that has hit the ground running and has played at these levels because they have gotten there and they've earned to be there, but they haven't been able to get over this hump.
You're absolutely right. I mean, when you look at the major finals in LAFC history, they've won 1 in 5 chances. You include Campeones Cup, that's 6. I mean, it's just their bogey, right? It's their kryptonite is these big finals. It's interesting to see because you think like they bring in the Hugo Llorises, the Olivier Giroud, Giorgio Chiellini, Gareth Bale, these players to try and win it. And Gareth Bale did go and win them that one, but otherwise, that experience hasn't really shown through, has it? I mean, you expect the experience to come through in moments like Giroud had, which he went and scored that goal. That's great, but you need more than that, obviously, because as you say, a 1-0 win isn't always going to get it done. It needs to be able to, have more control, exert more control in the game. And I think, we've seen that it's much more difficult when you don't have possession. Yes, that's the way that LAFC wants to play, but it requires you to be pretty much perfect a lot of times in order to be defensively perfect and then go and get that goal on the other end. That's why it's the way that smaller teams play against bigger teams, is because it's the way that a lesser team can beat a bigger team. That shouldn't necessarily be the way, in my opinion, that a team with the talent that LAFC possesses constantly plays. I think Steve Cherundolo often talked about when he first arrived that he wanted his team to be able to play in multiple ways. Now it doesn't seem like that's the case anymore. It seems like this is the only way that LAFC can play. And if it doesn't go, if they don't play perfectly and get that first goal, which I think we know is crucial for this team to score that first goal. I talked to a lot of people. If LAFC scored that first goal in Columbus, it's a completely different game. But when Columbus get that first goal, it allows them to play much more calm, much more relaxed, hold on to the ball, and not have to go and push LAFC for that goal. Whereas if LAFC scores that first goal, now Columbus is chasing the game, there's space in behind them, totally different for LAFC in transition. So, yeah, I think it all comes together in that. But I think that, you look at Open Cup coming up where LAFC is going to want and expect to make another final where, they're going to Seattle, a team that they have had a good record against recently. And if they host that final at home, they'll be favored to win it. And so they need to go and win that, because if they don't go, if they make that final and don't win it, I think, yeah, questions start needing to be asked about how does this team, because making finals is great, but you got to be able to win them as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And on top of that, like I mentioned, they're in these positions because they deserve to be there, because they've earned the right to be there as being such a good team. But they still got to go up to Seattle, where Seattle has a bone to pick as well. And we talk, and I just mentioned it, like what, the similarities of Seattle to LAFC to Columbus. Like LAFC has their number, but there's no given that they beat Seattle in this quick turnaround. You saw Giroud go off, saying he said he was probably fine. You saw Moody go off, and Cherundolo said he's probably not going to play. So it's going to be a team that's tired, a team that's emotionally banged up. How do they respond? They're certainly capable of it, but beating Seattle up in the Pacific Northwest is never an easy task. Obviously, the game is not at Lumen Field, but hey, either way, like it's a thing that LAFC needs to figure out, because, like you mentioned, if they don't, if they don't beat Seattle, or if they do beat Seattle and get to the final, which they would host, and don't win that, now you're looking at, okay, it's either we have to win Supporter Shield, which right now it seems like it's a pretty short race, and or if not, it has to be MLS Cup. And there's a very big possibility that if they do go through the gauntlet in the West, MLS Cup would have them right back against the Columbus Crew, which is obviously not something that has been pleasant to LAFC, who has been outscored 10-3 in those last 3 meetings, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a mental roadblock for LAFC, and I just think that going back to similarities and things that it reminds me of when they just couldn't win at Carson. Like they just couldn't win in that building. And it was like, how many chances are we going to get at this to finally, like, it became more of a mental thing than it did a game plan thing. It did a tactic breakdown. And you saw it. Like I was at the games. We were at the games. Like we saw that happening until they finally were like, man, we got this weight off our shoulder. And this is very similar to what Columbus has been doing to LAFC. And it's a mental thing for a team that is, I think Steve Cherundolo has them in a good mentality, in a good place, mentally strong. But then you see things happen where, like, Atuesta gets the early yellow, and I think Chanel got an early yellow as well. And you're like, man, this team. And it was funny that cooling break, like the discrepancies of the teams that I mentioned, the cooling break with the pad and the little whiteboard, like Columbus was just like very calm, and they show LAFC and Moody and Atuesta are arguing the whole time. And then like Sharundle was like giving Atuesta instructions. And I'm like, this is like, they're already flustered, and they're a few minutes into this game, or I don't even know if it's the cooling break or the injury break, but either way, like it's night and day with those two teams right now. And it's entertaining, of course, but it's like, how do you break that? And the LAFC has a pretty tough road again ahead of them, as a lot of other teams in MLS too. But LAFC's expectations are always high, and for them to lose that final is tough.
And they're going to have to do it without probably one of their biggest threats in transition. Reportedly, Kike's off to Toluca. Still talks with Bogusz potentially to Celtic if that goes through. I mean, that makes winning just way, way, way more difficult. So, yeah, we'll have to see how they can handle this the rest of the season. And as we discussed right before starting this podcast, they're going to have all those kind of fixtures that they haven't played because of this Leagues Cup, because of this Open Cup, kind of smashed into that end of the schedule where a lot of other teams have already played this. So it'll be tough on them physically as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm foreseeing a complaint about scheduling and things like that in the near future over here. But shout out to LAFC, man. Another final debate. I'm definitely that type of soccer fan and sports fan. Like, to get there is an accomplishment. And I think, especially in Leagues Cup, because they do get that CONCACAF Champions Cup spot, which Steve said, was a big objective. But you got to win trophies. You got to win trophies at the end of the day. And that's what sports are revolved around. So shout out to them. We'll see what happens in the future with LAFC. But it's always fun to be around that team. Let's talk about Colorado real quick in Leagues Cup. That was very surprising. I know Chris Arman said they were ranked 46 out of 47 going in. I don't even know what those rankings, like where those came from, if it was MLS or not. But either way, probably not many people expected much from the Rapids. They went through 4 Liga MX teams, like straight through, one being Club America in Carson, which was a home game for Club America, home game. Obviously, from the fan base perspective, it was, but they were not in Mexico, which is the other part of Leagues Cup that we talk about with Liga MX. But either way, Colorado, everything they did, merit to them, merit to Chris Armas, who, talking about mentality and coaches, has the team bought in. And one thing that I love that he says is, like, I just want my players to believe that they're winners. And I think they went into that third place game really believing that. Like, obviously losing 4-0 to LAFC was a big hit. But even after that game and speaking to him, you could tell almost his pride in his team for getting to that point, kind of proving people wrong. And they went into that third place game knowing that if they win that game, it gives them a CONCACAF champion spot. They're on the road and they still get it done. Zach Steffen, career resurgence almost, probably getting the eyes of US MNT, trying to get back into that goalkeeping number one spot. I've said it all season. Cole Bassett might be the most underrated player in MLS this year. Just incredible. Georgie's been great. Like that team and this is after, selling Moise Bombito, but salute to the Rapids, man. Like it's a very cool surprise. And once again, to the people that are really tapped into MLS, it is cool to see them get to that point. And it lines them up, I think, pretty nicely for the home stretch of the MLS season.
You absolutely nailed it all there. I think, Armas lost that game in LA, but he said right after it, we were ranked 46th, but we believe we're number one and we work like we're number two. And to me, that was the perfect quote because it just showed how, as you say, proud he is of this team, but as well, the mentality of that team to, shut out all the noise outside and say, we're just going to outwork you on this pitch. And that's what they did to Liga MX teams all tournament. And as you mentioned, that was going to be one of my points as well, is that, sure, we can talk about it. They were at home most of the time and they had that advantage, but in Carson, it was a stadium full of Club America fans and they went in there and did not allow a goal and won in that penalty shootout with, again, Zach Steffen coming up with, as you say, a career insurgent, Mauricio Pochettino. I hope you are watching because this man, he's had some tough moments in his career and, he went and we've seen it with a few U.S. goalkeepers now that they struggle when they're that number two at the big club, as he did it with Manchester City. And I think with Steffen, it's one of those things where he's really good when he's playing week in and week out, but he struggles a little bit when he's not that starter every single week and he has to kind of jump in for the cup games or whatever it may be. But when he's starting week in and week out, he is one of the best American goalkeepers we have. I think he shows that again in this tournament. In a World Cup type tournament, penalties are a big thing, right? They can have you advance much further than you would have otherwise. So having a goalkeeper like that who has the experience and the pedigree to be able to do it again and again in a penalty shootout is certainly something that's attractive when you're looking for a national team goalkeeper. So I think he's right back in the conversation for sure. And Chris Armas getting the credit that he deserves and maybe doesn't get a lot of times throughout MLS. Cole Bassett, you mentioned, definitely deserves that credit. And Mihalovic as well. I mean, doesn't get that. He gets, some criticism from the U.S. side of it as well, I think, too often because he is, in my opinion, probably the best set piece taker as an American. Like no other American is a better set piece taker than Georgie. So when he provides all those danger on corners that the Rapids continue to score on and find ways to win through that, it's just a really well-rounded team and well bought in, hardworking.
It's good to see, and especially you kind of transition things to MLS. Like they're in fourth place in the West right now. So like this is the one thing I do like about tournaments and cups like this. Like it's definitely a big confidence booster for certain teams. I think we saw that last season with Houston in the U.S. Open Cup. Like they hit a second gear when after that tournament was over, and they just went on a tear for the latter half of the season, and then they got into the playoffs and made a nice little run through MLS Cup playoffs. So it could boost teams. The last team I want to mention is Philly. Obviously, they lose that third place game and they leave empty-handed, unfortunately, which is too common for Philly and Jim Curtin and that front office. But two things you have to mention. We're talking about goalkeepers. Andre Blake looked like he turned the clock back all tournament and looked like he got back to that level, which is a massive part of their success in MLS. And Ty Baribo, like, wins the top scorer of the tournament, just on an absolute tear. He scored twice in 3 minutes in that third place game yesterday. So Philly's the same story. Like they had to fight to get to the playoffs because they had such a bad start to the season. But it almost seems like they're going to get a little bit of a boost from this tournament and be able to kind of make some noise in that stretch run in MLS. Or am I just sipping the Kool-Aid a little too much on them?
I think you might be a little bit, but I think when you look at Ty Baribo, that's the really silver lining for me for Philadelphia, and the real shining light is to say, I mean, if you told somebody at the beginning of the MLS season that Ty Baribo was going to win the Leagues Cup Golden Boot, I think they would have called you crazy. I mean, they wouldn't have. That's insane. So Yeah, it's great for Philly, and I think, we see this kind of a lot with Philly where they have generally it's people coming out of their academy, right? But they find these gems hidden in the rough, and find ways to win with them. And I think that's kind of what they're going to need to do next season as they kind of rebuild this. Hopefully, they can make those playoffs. We'll see. I think maybe less likely, but without Champions Cup next season, I think it could actually kind of benefit them in their rebuild. Um, at the beginning of next season. So we'll see about that. Obviously the talk has been around Jim Curtin all season, but I think there's no way you can let him go. He's an MLS legend and can rebuild that with the ease in a year. So yeah, Philly is Philly, and they can be back competing next year, in my opinion. And they show that here. I mean, they are consistently good in tournaments, and that's what it takes to win trophies most of the time, right? Supporter Shield is your only exception to that. So I think that they're always going to compete, even when they're not necessarily performing at their top form. They can kind of snap into it as they've shown.
Leagues Cup, man, that was it. Even without Messi, still entertaining. I said it yesterday, man. Like, people enjoy this. It's just like people love to get online and hate on things. And also, like, this is a little bit of advice. If you don't like something, like, don't talk about it, because that means you're giving it more attention if you don't like it. So if you don't enjoy it, just go on about your summer. It was a crowded summer with soccer, tournaments, and Olympics. But I thought last year was good. I thought this year was pretty entertaining as well. And that's a bow on that. Any closing thoughts on Leagues Cup before we officially move on to the MLS stretch run, or are we all done there?
Yeah, man, just impressive from MLS to have those Final Four all MLS, and three of them had won MLS Cup in the past 5 years or whatever. So it's or been in MLS Cup in the past 5 years, excuse me. And so it's just the consistency we're seeing from the top teams in MLS, which is a good thing to see. We know about the parity in MLS, that will always remain, but it's good to see that kind of the top teams can sustain themselves as well at the top.
Yeah, and to people that say that this might not mean anything, like, just look at the celebrations. Like, if you're an athlete, winning anything means something. But like, the sheer happiness from Messi last year in Miami, and then the sheer happiness in Columbus yesterday, probably given that it was a rematch of MLS Cup, like, of course it means something. It means a lot to these players. So once again, well done to the Columbus crew for winning the 2024 Leagues Cup. Let's move on to MLS quickly before we wrap up. It's going to be a quick stretch run with, like you mentioned, U.S. Open Cup semifinals and final thrown in there, and also Campeones Cup. But there's some playoff spots to be had. I feel like the way the table looks right now, the top spots in both conferences are pretty set. Obviously, seeding will change a bit, but in the East is Miami, is Columbus, and to me, everybody else. Obviously, since he's going to have to try to battle their way back into a little bit of relevancy, but they're still up there standings wise. But there's that middle tier of teams in both conferences that it could get tricky. I mean, I think both New York teams are going to obviously battle there in the East. But then the 8 and 9 spot right now are both going to change for me, and maybe in both conferences. Right now in the East, Toronto and Atlanta have the 8 and 9 spots. I don't know. Toronto a little more than Atlanta might be able to stay in the playoff mix for that wild card game, but Atlanta, after offloading so many stars in Yakumakis and Thiago Almada and Caleb Wiley, I think they're going to have a tough time. And then you look at the bottom half, and this is why I decided to wear my Revs jersey today, because you look at what the Revs did up in Montreal, a 5-0 win. You saw Langoni make his debut, goal and an assist, and it's good feelings, right? But it's not just that. The bottom teams under the playoff line right now are Philly, Montreal, New England, Chicago, Nashville, and then DC. And it's all by 1 point. 27 and 26 points right now, and Atlanta at 28 points. So there's a lot of ground to be gained by any of these teams. A lot of those teams I just mentioned are not that good. And some teams made more moves than others in the summer transfer window. So I want to ask you, who do you think in the East will lock up that 8 and 9 spot that will potentially, that will essentially be a wild card shoo-in for the Cup playoffs? Because I already know in my mind who I have, but I want to hear what you think about 8 and 9 in the East.
Yeah, man. The more I look at it, the more I'm thinking you might be right on Philadelphia, because that is just so tight in the bottom of the East. For me, yeah, it's the bottom of the East and kind of the middle of the West that is so exciting and so tight, because yeah, from that ninth spot all the way to the bottom of the table is 2 points. I mean, imagine that you're in last place and you can win a game and hop into the playoff spot. So yeah, you just never know. But I would have to go Philly, and I think I think Toronto hold on to that spot. Um, I think they do, but yeah, Philly and Atlanta is going to be an interesting battle. And as you say, with New England, I mean, Carlos Heel, when he's in that team, it's a different team. They are just fantastic, and they can go and beat anybody, really. And so they absolutely have a chance with him back healthy now. And yeah, Chicago, you never know. Montreal, same thing. Nashville, new coach, get that excitement. The new coach boost we often see. And DC United, Benteke, we know he wants to score goals, and he has now a golden boot to go chase. So that's going to motivate not only him, but that team. So it's just going to be a tight race. I will give you Toronto and Philly, though.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, the race is going to be fun to watch. I have Philly getting in there too. I think just what they did in Leagues Cup shows a little bit of that potential, and that start to the season was so bad that I feel like they're gonna. I mean, I feel like they always think they have something to prove because of the caliber of team they've been over the years. But I think they make a late push, and you know who I'm going for that last spot, man. I'm gonna push the Revs in there. I think that they made some pretty decent moves. Even though they got rid of DeJuan Jones, who is a League Cup champion with Columbus now, and Henry Kessler, but I think Tim Parker in there could help a little bit. Langoni, obviously coming over from Boca as a big team. Just have to see how these players adapt. But if Montreal was a little bit of hope or a little bit of a glimpse in what's coming to the future for this team, that's a very potent attack, especially with Carlos Hill on the field. You almost forget that Chancalay had a season-ending injury, and Dylan Barrero, if he's out there, like the weak spot to me is striker. But if you have so much talent around it, you could see somebody like Bobby Wood and Brioni get easy goals as Bobby Wood did up in Montreal. So give me Philly and New England. I'm saying it on the record confidently for that for those last two spots in the East. And in the West, like you mentioned, is more so the middle of the table. It's very crowded. Like the two LA teams are up top, and then like after that, it's a battle between RSL, who after Chicho's injury this weekend, we don't know exactly what the severity of that is. Like it's a really big hit. Obviously, offloading Andres Gomez in the transfer window doesn't help either. Colorado, we just talked about. Seattle, who's had this crazy resurgence, and U.S. Open Cup semifinal against LAFC. Depending on how that goes, that could have an impact there. But like you have teams like the Timbers, who I don't know, man. Maybe one of the more exciting teams to watch this year. There's always something crazy happening with them. Houston and Austin, who Austin, I think, bringing in Bukhari has a new look on offense as well. And then the lower tier teams, like I still think, and I didn't mention St. Louis in the Leagues Cup conversation, but St. Louis had a really good showing in Leagues Cup, in my opinion. Not in terms of making a run, although I think they gave Club America everything they could handle in that game. But I just think that they showed with the new coach, with new players, like there is a different mentality, and that's a tough team. And I was there at the St. Louis America game in Carson, and I was like, man, this team just looks different from when Bradley Carnell was there, and it's like it was almost like a fresh start for them. And I think that the hole might be a little too deep for them to climb up the standings, but I think they might have something to say. Look, if Leuven is playing tapped in the way he looked in that game, like he's top of the league in terms of chance creators, in terms of impact offensively. So how does the West break down for you?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Specifically on Leuven, I think when you bring in Marcel Hartel, that has been a big signing for them and has kind of pushed the creative responsibility a little bit off of Leuven and allowed him to kind of play a more pivotal role in just kind of moving the team forward in midfield. And yeah, I think he's also one of the best players in MLS. I love watching Edward Leuven whenever I get the chance. But yeah, I think that gap is probably a little bit too big for them to kind of close in the end of the season. But yeah, positive signs certainly. But yeah, it's all those teams that you talk about, kind of in the middle of the table. Salt Lake, yeah, as you mentioned, Andres Gomez selling, and then you bring in Gonçalves, and then they had one other signing that I'm forgetting right now. But it's interesting to me because they seem like they want to still try and go for the win by signing Gonçalves and the other guy, and investing money in more DPs, a new number 10. But then you sell a player who has had so much success in Andres Gomez this season, and it's like, yes, in theory they can swap out, but it is not so easy to kind of hit the ground running with a new signing as it is to continue the form that Andres Gomez has been on this season. So I hope for their sake that happens, but I'm a little bit questionable about that. And then, as you mentioned, Chicho Arango kind of pulled up with that hammy issue. We'll see how serious that is. Hopefully, not too much, because yeah, he's in that Golden Boot race as well, having a fantastic season. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, that's going to be a crazy Rocky Mountain battle with Colorado in their form. Seattle, we know this is what they do at the end of the season. They pick up form at the end and go and finish as high as they possibly can and snatch that usually second spot or something like that. Um, and yeah, it's Cascadia all around there is going to be really tight, and then Texas is going to fight it out for the spot in those final playoff spots. So yeah, it's just going to be really really tight all around. I think this West is probably even harder to predict than the East is. But yeah, I kind of do love the fact that it's kind of those regional battles, right? You see LA at the top, you see the Rocky Mountain right there behind them. Then it comes Cascadia and then Texas, right? They're all kind of bunched in there.
It's gonna make for a fun last month and a half or so of the MLS season. Just teams battling. We made it through 45 minutes. We didn't even talk about Lionel Messi and Miami barely, but we're gonna talk about them now because you can't have an MLS conversation without them. The Supporters Shield race, it seems like it's theirs to lose. What after they beat Cincy, even being down a man for that whole second half, it's like it's them. And Messi hasn't played since before Copa America. He got injured in that final, which we won't talk about. But it's Miami, and then everybody else in the Shield race. Do you think they pull it off? And if they do, is it good luck to everybody that's not named Columbus, basically?
Yes, yes, pretty much. I think so. I think it's going to be tough for any team to catch Miami at this point. Like you have, a Columbus or an LAFC specifically with games in hand that could, have that shot, but it requires them to go on a winning run, which yes, LAFC has been able to do, but as we said, it's going to be tough for them physically in this end of the season. Especially they have Open Cup. Columbus has a Campeones Cup. They're also probably going to rest players come this next weekend after this celebration that they had. So yeah, it just seems tough for me the way that the schedule shakes out for a team to go and catch Miami. But you never know. Maybe somebody can. And then when it comes to playoffs, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Um, I think that out of the West, you're going to expect one of those LA teams, and out of the East, you're going to expect a fantastic Eastern Conference final in Miami between Miami and Columbus. Because I mean, in Columbus, you expect Columbus to kind of win that game. You see them as the favorites, but in Miami, that is a toss-up for me, especially with Lionel Messi expectedly back. Right, that will be a fantastic game, and Cincinnati will not want to be forgotten either in that East. So yeah, it's going to be a good one come playoffs. But yeah, I think Inter Miami hold on for the Supporter Shield.
What a luxury for Tata Martino to have a rested Lionel Messi for the playoffs when it really matters. So it's gonna be very interesting out there and see what happens in South Florida as well. And let's end MLS talk on the LA teams, man. Obviously, you mentioned the two LA teams are up top. Justin was in Carson, present for MLSsoccer.com for Marco Royce's debut, which is very eventful as well. A team that was looking, I don't want to say stagnant, but didn't look like the Galaxy that we saw before Leagues Cup. And then Marco Royce comes on and it's automatically, goal, assist, and things just flipped on their head almost. So how was Marco Royce's debut? How do you see the Galaxy? Me coming into the season, I had them as a top 5 team in MLS. So I'm very happy that this prediction is sticking because it's the only one that I've landed so far. The other one was Nashville. Don't sleep on Nashville. Luis Muriel is going to be able to defender. So all of those are awful. But I have confidence in the Galaxy. So at least somebody's making me look smart. But just talk to me about the Galaxy and what you see. And maybe we finally get a Western Conference final Tráfico. That would be amazing.
That would be incredible. Don't feel too bad. I thought Luis Muriel was going to be good this year too. No, but yeah, it's been incredible for the Galaxy. I had them top 5 in the West, I think, in my prediction. So maybe not as high as you, but yeah, they've been blowing it out of the water. I expected what I've seen from Joseph Paintsill. Gabriel Peck has blown all my expectations out of the water. He's been probably their best player this season, which is saying something. And so, yeah, it really is incredible. But that game, Marco Royce's debut, man, as you mentioned, it was kind of like the Leagues Cup final, honestly, with Atlanta just sitting back defensively in that first half. It was one of the more boring Galaxy games this season that I watched, to be frank. But once Marco Royce came on the pitch, everything changed. He is just so silky smooth. His positioning, his movement, his passing, it was all just you. He's one of those players where you put him on the pitch and you say, "Oh, so that's the quality. Oh, I see it now." And I think it's a perfect combination with Ricky Puig as well, because Puig is kind of this busy, buzzing bee, right? He's just moving around constantly, trying to pick up the ball, running back this way, that way. And Royce is just kind of more the messy style of, I'm going to walk around, I'm going to pick up my spots, I'm going to get the ball at my feet and pick out the nice passes. And that's what he continued to do. Set up the Puig's curler and then got a goal for himself to win the game, in Zlatan Ibrahimovic fashion, basically.
I love that assist so much because it just showed, obviously patience more so, but it's just experience in that moment to not freak out with the ball in the box and kind of just waited and waited and waited. It was like, all right, I know Ricky's going to pick his spot. As soon as he saw him there, just gifted him the ball. And then, Ricky did what he does. So Galaxy rolling, obviously offensively, one of the best attacks in MLS, and defensively, they still have some holes that need to be, I guess, a concern, but if you're a team that could put up 3 goals every game, you're going to be fine, especially in MLS. So salute to the Galaxy as well. Justin, it's a great breakdown, man.
Ricky took to Twitter immediately after as well. Don't forget.
I love the Ricky Sasha back and forth. It's amazing. They actually showed that to Sasha live on MLS wrap up, and it was pretty great. So yeah, no, it's like we mentioned, all podcasts is going to be such a great home stretch of MLS. The last few games that are here, and then once playoffs start, it's a full sprint ahead to MLS Cup in December. So this is a great breakdown. I appreciate that. I am going to give you the floor now to talk about Manchester City, your team, because I am not the expert there. So anything you want to mention about Man City as that season and those tournaments get going? Anything that you have on your mind about Manchester City?
Oh man, here we go, man. The quest for 5 is underway. It's going to be another great battle, I think, between City and Arsenal this season. Of course, I believe City will come out on top once again. But yeah, should be a great one. I think it'll be interesting because, Arsenal are the more defensively solid team this season. They are continuing to kind of go up and up. The question is whether they can kind of continue their form. We've seen with Liverpool's Klopp's Liverpool, that when they had to challenge City over and over and over again, eventually that kind of caught up with them physically, and they couldn't kind of keep it going for 3 years in a row. But we'll see if Arsenal will be able to do that. On the other hand, I think City aren't necessarily as strong as they were last season. Obviously, Julian Alvarez is gone. Just brought Gundogan back, so that is an addition. But I just don't think the team is quite as strong as it was last season. So I think it might be a tighter race if Arsenal can keep up the form that they did last season. Especially defensively. Whether they can stay fit without those injuries is kind of the question. But yeah, quest for 5, man. Let's do it. Make more history, and then hopefully Pep signs that contract, because yeah, it is his last year, and I don't want to lose him. But it is what it is. I feel like, because this is his 9th year, I'm like, just make it 10. Like, why not? There's got for Pep, there's always got to be a motivation. You got to find these motivations, because Pep, like he said at the beginning of the year, like right now he feels no motivation to go to win the Premier League again. But by the end of the season, by the last few months, he'll start to find that motivation. It'll come from somewhere. So that's how I feel with this contract too. Just pick out some kind of motivation, whether it be a decade or whatever else, man. Bring him back, please.
Yeah, when you're winning everything, especially in the fashion that they do, I could get his sentiment. But you meant to say Boston Celtics fan Pep Guardiola. You forgot that part.
He helped you win a title, man.
We love it. Listen, man. We went from talking about Leagues Cup to MLS to Manchester City. That's what you call versatility. You're not getting that in no other podcast. I'm sorry, you're not. It's just not going to happen. Justin, it's been a pleasure. I'm glad we finally got to link up for the podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe to Upper 90 YouTube channel. Check out my guys' work there as well on MLSsoccer.com. Justin, tapped in for the stretch run of MLS and playoffs, doing great work as always. I appreciate you for joining me, brother. Any final closing thoughts before we get out of here, man?
No, man, just appreciate you for having me on. Anybody who has made it this far, y'all better be subscribed, liked, everything that Andy does, because this man works so hard and puts out some of the best content in MLS. So appreciate you, Andy, and keep putting in that hard work, man. We love to see it.
Yes, sir, brother. We'll see each other soon, I'm sure, in a press box or somewhere like that. If you're still listening, I appreciate you. Check out the YouTube so you can see the brilliant crayon flag Revs jersey I'm wearing today with the Red Sox hat. Although I don't know why I'm wearing a Red Sox hat because we are terrible. But that's another conversation for another day. This was Kicking the Real. We'll catch you next time, man. Peace.